Is it okay for the church to get involved in the public arena? Should Christians be actively involved in the free elections of the United States of America? Faith Wins is an organization dedicated to engaging pastors, congregations, and Christians in the public arena. Why, you may ask? Because the influence of Christians needs to be felt around this country. Jesus is the solution, and we need to bring biblical solutions to the marketplace of ideas before it's too late, and we need to do it now. There are over 80 million eligible Christian voters in this country, but only 30 million regularly participate in the elections. This needs to change, and Chad Connelly is going to tell you why in just a minute. Check us out online at faithwins.us. That's faithwins.us. When we sit on the sidelines and hope for a better future, the enemy wins. When we mobilize, register, and make our voices heard, faith wins every time. For far too many decades, the church has stood by the side as politics is taken over by the enemy in this country. In the name of avoiding all things worldly, we have allowed ourselves to be ruled politically by those who ignore the godly biblical foundation of our great country. It's time that Christ followers get politically active and bring the kingdom down to earth, especially in all 570,000 elected offices in this country. Faith Wins is dedicated to engaging pastors, congregations, and Christians in the public arena. Why? Because the influence of Christians needs to be felt around the country. There are 80 million eligible voters in the Christian community, but only 30 million participate on a regular basis. In 2024, this needs to change by the millions, and Chad Connelly is going to tell you why in just a second. I'm Jim Brangenberg. Check us out online at faithwins.org. That's faithwins.org. Chad Connelly, welcome back to the Faith Wins podcast.
Man, it's great to be with you, Jim. And you tell Martha I owe her a big hug and thanks. Doing great design. You guys are pros and love being with you, brother.
It's good to have you back. Listen, since the last time we released a podcast, you've been running on overdrive for months. And the Lord has you and Faith Wins, the whole organization, on a mission for 2024. What is your mission for this year, and how is it different than 2018 and 2020 and 2022?
Well, the mission hadn't changed. We're still committed to maximizing the Christian vote. It's certainly not too much of that going on. And I think a lot of people try to reach out to pastors, but I see a really inauthentic effort by the parties, the committees, the people who are in the political sphere. And, we ran really hard last year. Of course, we had the whole month of December where we didn't travel a whole lot. I did go to Iowa. But, my thing is not just elections, as you know, Jim. It's the emergence of the Christian votes, yes, but the voices. And Christians need to be involved in the coaching the Little League and in Sunday school and, helping the tough situations in their communities or guiding and mentoring youth or voter registration or poll watcher recruitment. It's all the above. The great thing about this cycle is you've got presidential candidates. So presidential candidates running around the country raises the level of people paying attention. That's the bottom line. So I just saw it as a draw. That's probably the right word, is if I can put presidential candidates in front of a bunch of pastors, that's what I want to do. So this past year, I guess we started last March. Of course, we had some presidential candidates who had announced. And so we've done, I think our final number was 78 so far. We're going to do more here in South Carolina, obviously. There's still a couple candidates running around, but we've done 78 meetings with 8 different presidential candidates. And yes, we invited them all parties, all stripes, everything else. Yes, also, some of them didn't accept our invitations. And so we have been doing those meetings where we put pastors with presidential candidates to have good, private, off-the-record conversations about issues that matter to the church.
All right, so these 78 meetings with pastors from all over the United States with presidential candidates. We'll talk about the presidential candidates in a minute. But with the pastors, because they're the ones with their hands on the heartbeat of their communities. What are you hearing them say about the state of their cities?
Well, and that's the exact right question. And I've told the media, as a former state party chairman in South Carolina, I do a ton of media. I've done 3 today. I think I did 5 or 6 yesterday and 5 or 6, I think today's Wednesday or Thursday, the day before that. And I've done just about every online major news source you can imagine talking about what's going on in South Carolina. But one thing I tell them, Jim, is pastors have the best front row seat and the finger on the pulse feels for what's going on in the communities. And I'm telling you, I know people are seeing this everywhere, but this immigration situation with the porous, wide open southern border where the cartels can track who's coming across, but somehow our government can't. Pastors are they're the bleeding edge. They are the stopgap. They're having to make up for the failures of the political class at the federal, some of the state and the city level. They're dealing with drug overdoses. They're dealing with human trafficking. And I mean, it's been every state I've been in, Jim. The pastors really do have a finger on the pulse of what's going out there.
What do you hear from them? There's a lot of negative stuff. But it's true. It's the reality of what we're dealing with. But what are you hearing pastors in their local community say that encouraged you?
Yeah, look, I'm encouraged because I see more and more pastors get involved. And so here's my pitch to the presidential candidates. And 5 of them tried to hire me. And, they give you that, we're going to hire you and your pastor network. And I'm like, no, you're not. And we're not doing it that way. And I know some people in the ministry space give away their endorsements. I don't. And one reason I don't is I've seen this from every angle. And I think that, and this is not a broad brush, but it's pretty close. By and large, the consultants want to check the preacher box and it's done. And I believe also, even if I'm for a candidate or I like a candidate or whatever, I can reach pastors that they can't because I haven't endorsed and I'm impartial. I can get those pastors to listen to candidates. And in those meetings, I've told them, I said, look, we're going to ask hard questions. It's going to be a private meeting. I had a media person say, you're having secret pastor meetings. No, they're not secret. They're just private and you're not invited. And so I say they're going to be private, no media. We're going to ask hard questions and we're going to pray over you. It's just that simple. And so after a while, they started working with us. They realized they weren't going to be able to hire me or my pastor network. Some of the pastors were offered, especially in those early states, those carve-out states, Iowa, New Hampshire, and at home in South Carolina, they're offered a bunch of money. And I've told the pastors, look, you're a pastor. And if you're inclined to endorse, have at it. Here's what I want you to understand is, what if you pick the wrong one? And then how do you have influence? My goal, as you know, Jim, you and Martha and I talked about it, is to have real influence. I don't want to be part of, I'm checking the evangelical box. I want to have influence with those candidates, not just presidential, Senate, gubernatorial, congressional, county council, school board. I think Christian voices ought to be heard and felt. And when you give in and you endorse or you put your name on a piece of paper, you've lost that ability because they're just checking a box. Most of the campaigns, they want to get 100 pastor names or 200. That's fine. They should do that. But the second part about it is if you pick the wrong candidate, how do you have influence? The second part about it is, do you really want to stand on a stage with candidate X for Congress or anywhere else and have to defend things they do? I can defend issues biblically that we believe in all day long. But as you know, defending people may be more difficult. So I just tell pastors, think about it. I just stop, think about it, and don't just endorse willy-nilly, because I'm telling you, I told the guys in Iowa, on January 16th, the day after your caucus, there won't be a consultant in the country that can find their way to Des Moines. I told the guys in New Hampshire, we have a team up there. South Carolina, same thing. The early states serve a very important purpose. They vet them, they weed them out, they make those candidates hone their message, Jim. I know here in our state, we expect to meet them at the meet and three and the buffet and the breakfast place and the Waffle House and the barbecue hut. And people in these early states love that distinction of being able to ask good, hard questions. And I'm telling you, pastors even more so. And we had some doozy of questions that took place I'd love to tell you about.
Yeah, I would too. But before we get to that, you got pastors and they're wanting to endorse candidates. But what we really have needed as pastors to speak the truth about the political system and engaging their congregations in the political system. We're not telling them where to vote. But we're trying to get them to vote, trying to get them registered to vote and get them engaged. How many pastors do you see today in 2024 versus when you first started the Faith Engagement Initiative in 2015, that 9 years, how many more are involved?
Oh my goodness. Actually, it was July 2013. I started that with GOP Faith.
Well, I met you in 15. Okay, yeah, so yeah.
I've done some of that here in South Carolina, up thousands. Pastors are waking up. So our methodology is very different. Most ministry groups buy lists, church lists, and so contact at Maple Street Baptist gets invited, which that kind of, thuds. And I'm not against that. That's one method. What I only put pastors on our list if they've been on a Zoom call with us or been to a meeting. And so we work through pastors to invite other pastors. And I believe it's that pastor influence that makes a difference. I'll give you an example. I was in New Hampshire the Friday before their primary just 3 weeks ago. And I had an Israeli leader come and speak, and we had 38 pastors in the room, I believe. And one of the consultants came. We actually had an up the hill, tough slogging candidate who did show up, and he spoke, and he was fantastic. Nobody hardly knows him. He's a long shot guy, but he came to the meeting, and I appreciated that. And another candidate who was one of the top several wouldn't show up because it was only a handful of people. So the consultant comes in the room, and I said, thanks for coming. Really wish your candidate had come, but I understand. And I said, I want you to notice something. You guys look at this room of 38 pastors and you count 38. You see 38. And what I see that guy over there? He's a church of about 1,000. And you see that pastor right there? He's got 4 campuses around the state. And so what I see is not 38 pastors. I see 10 or 12,000 congregants that you could have been speaking to today. And I don't know how many places you're going to speak to 10 or 12,000 people, but the consultants who by and large maybe aren't in our stream of evangelical belief, as you can imagine, they minimize that. They see pastors as a one data point. I see pastors as multipliers. So to your question, I see this multiplying. We do a lot of little meetings that turn into big meetings, that find new pastors to host the little meetings, and we rinse and repeat. And it's working. I believe in it. I've spoken to donors. I got a donor call in a little while trying to tell them, yes, what we do is very, very different. And we're a whole lot less expensive than some of the stuff you're seeing. It just costs us less. We're just traveling to the States and having small meetings. We're not doing a big extravaganza. We're trying to win over pastors to realize and recognize what impact they can have if they would just teach their people to vote biblical values.
All right, so let's talk about those meetings with 8 different presidential candidates. Why did you meet with them?
Because I knew it was a way to draw pastors in, and I'm trying to demonstrate, hey, they want to meet with you. Not most of them do. Some of them, Jim, just haven't responded. And I get it. They maybe don't want to be around preachers.
And most of them aren't in the race anymore, so it's okay.
I see most of them aren't in the race anymore. And some of them, the former president, he's done meetings with us. But he's got to deal with the Secret Service. That's a whole different hoop to jump through. But when pastors are in that setting, there's no media listening in and, eavesdropping and reporting on it, the pastors feel a freedom. And so they ask good, hard questions. Where do you stand on this? What's your core belief? Do you know the Lord? Do you have a saving relationship with Jesus Christ? We've had some fantastic meetings, and I won't tell the name, but in one of our meetings with a candidate, the candidate had a staffer, and they were talking about, I'm pro-life, but the staffer was emotional when this was happening, and it was only a handful of pastors there. Probably shouldn't even identify the state, I guess, because this is kind of private. And the staffer is emotional when the candidate says, I'm pro-life, but, and the but was the, rape and incest and all the things that you and I have heard. And the staffer says, we haven't talked about this, but my mother was raped. I'm the product of a rape. Are you saying my life doesn't count? And so because it's a private meeting and pastors are ministering, boy, that was God magic right there. And not magic, but you get it. That was a God thing, a serendipity. And, the other thing too, Jim, we've had staffers, consultants, people work for the campaigns, come to churches, get saved, get involved in the church. We've had real deep conversations with candidates about their faith life, their background. And so it's been one of those offshoots that I told the teams it would happen. But I told them it would only happen if they had a relationship. And so our core team, I can name 3 pastors right now off the top of my head that are texting people who ran for president that they built a deep relationship with, and they're doing Bible studies. They're sharing scripture. So those are the offshoots, the ripple effect. The real reason we did it was I wanted to show pastors what major influence they had. I didn't want to endorse and be with one particular candidate and then lose my ability to reach the other candidates. I wanted to show these pastors that, boy, oh boy, if we can let them know that there's not just Faith Wins people in Nevada or Iowa or South Carolina or New Hampshire, but boy, they saw our Faith Wins pin in other states. One of the leading candidates did a meeting in Iowa, flew here to South Carolina, actually did a meeting in our state. I was there. I helped introduce them. I clearly said I'm not endorsing. Flew from here to New Hampshire, and it was a GOP thing. And my pastor happened to be asked to pray there. And so Pastor Peter walks in with a Faith Wins lapel pin, and the candidate said, "Do you know Chad?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm on his team." I think there's real power in that. And it also teaches the pastors not to be in and out, but to be long-term to make a real impact in our nation. I believe that's what's got to happen, Jim.
When you met with these candidates, these are candidates that many Americans are placing their hope in for the future of our country, the sustenance of our country. What is the common thread you're hearing from them that encouraged you?
You know, I think as a Christian, we really get a little bit depressed about the media coverage and maybe the lack of fullness of story or even blatant dishonesty. I'm encouraged when I see this many people who are out there talking about issues to make media cover it. I was also encouraged by the quality of the candidates. I mean, these are real people with marriages and children and situations and problems and challenges. And hearing their personal stories, being backstage with them or having lunch or breakfast or coffee with them, riding in the car, I rode in the car with some of them, and getting to know them as real people. You see they're really people and they care deeply about the nation. And by and large, most of them care deeply about their faith. And so I think that wasn't a surprise. I've been around a lot of candidates, obviously 20 years in this deal. But getting to know every bevy of candidates that comes along is really encouraging to me. The quality of the people who put themselves out there, they'll stick their neck out, and the kind of stuff they deal with, the criticism, the media, golly bum, it's tough. But most of them have a saving faith. Most of them know the Lord. Most of them are real serious about their faith. And having those deep conversations, I wish everybody could experience that.
Before we go with today's episode, there's a lot of great updates, fantastic updates. The listener listening today is going, "Chad, so good to get an update. It's so glad to hear all of these encouraging things." What's the overall message you want to communicate with our listeners today before we go?
Yeah, the overall message is don't give up on the country. Don't give up on God's role for you. Matthew 5:13-16 is very clear. If we're not salt and life, the salt has lost its savor, its flavor. It's good for nothing, to be thrown in the street and trodden under the feet of men. We don't ever want to hear from the Father, we were good for nothing. We want to hear, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." So I'd tell people, don't give up on the country. My buddy Bob McEwen has a quote. He says, we may realize that God might know what he's doing. And I did a presentation to a bunch of donors a few weeks ago in your former state. And the first guy that spoke was just negative. Just, it was awful. And me and Dana were just, oh my goodness, oh Lord, this is awful. And I got up there and I kind of discarded my talk and I said, "But God." And so I want to encourage people that sometimes when it seems the darkest, God's about to shine the light. And, in a physical sense, the pendulum swings, but God's not done with us. And I've told my story on these podcasts, suicide, my first wife, meeting Dana, who had lived through suicide. She had 2 little girls. I had 2 little boys. The greatest lesson I learned after meeting Dana and getting married, and that's 16 and a half years ago, was God wasn't done with us. And the way I read scripture, if he was done with us, we'd be out of here. He'd be done. So I believe he's allowing us to grab a remnant, to say this is still the city on the hill, the shining city on the hill that Winthrop talked about in the 1600s. It goes way, way back to America Matters. What is it? Some 84 cents of every missionary dollar comes from this 4% of the people on the planet called America. No wonder the devil attacks it. No wonder the enemy is after us. No wonder there's so much discouragement. And it's one of the greatest weapons of the enemy is to use discouragement. I'm just not going to be a part of it. I got discouraged one time and I didn't enjoy it. So I decided that any day you wake up and there's not a chalk line around your body, it's a great day. Somebody at State House. So, how you doing?
Wait a minute. Hang on. No, if you got a chalk line around your body, it means you won because you're gone. You're not even there anymore. You're with the Lord. So come on. Now that's the best day. The chalk line may be bad for everybody else left behind. Okay, sorry. I interrupted. You're on a roll, but as Christians, so often we celebrate being here. I am going to celebrate when I get to heaven. I'm excited about it.
Amen. I'm so sorry. I stand corrected. But that's one of my little lines I stole from Les Brown. But I told him I'm super good, but it's only Wednesday. I expect improvement. So I just think people ought to rejoice that God picked us to be right here, right now. And there's a reason he picked us. It's up to us to fulfill that and not whimper and whine and cave in and give up and think that, oh, woe is me, and be Eeyore from the old Winnie the Pooh series. We need to be positive outlook. We ought to be able to forget those things are behind, as Paul said, and move forward to claim the prize. And so I'm excited. I am encouraged. I see a lot of encouragement, and it's up to us to grab that and go seize the day.
Great conversation today, Chad. Thanks so much for the update. It was so good to be here. And thanks for listening to the Faith Wins podcast with Faith Wins founder, Chad Connelly. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and I want to ask you to check out Faith Wins online at faithwins.org. That's faithwins.org. Your vote is needed and necessary as we all learn to engage in our system of free elections around the United States of America. If you're not registered to vote, stop right now. Everything you're doing, please take time to do so on your local county voter registration website. In the upcoming election, vote for candidates supporting biblical values and a biblical worldview. And if you don't know what they stand for, find out, do some research. And until next time, remember, when we sit on the sidelines and hope for a better future, the enemy wins. When we mobilize, register, and make our voices heard, faith wins every time.
Go to faithwins.org.
What would happen if just 4 to 5% of those 30 to 40 million non-voting Christians got off the sidelines, registered to vote, and showed up at the polls? The church will have a voice.
My name is Chad Connelly. When I founded Faith Wins, it was to spread the truth that God's role in America is irreplaceable. Faith wins when people of faith vote their values.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Faith Wins podcast with Faith Wins founder, Chad Connelly. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and I want to ask you to check out Faith Wins online at faithwins.us. That's faithwins.us. Your vote is needed and necessary, and we all need to learn to engage in our system of free elections right here in the United States of America. If you're not registered to vote, please take time to do so on your local county voter registration website and do it today. In an upcoming election, vote for candidates supporting biblical values and a biblical worldview. Until next time, remember, when Christians engage in the public arena, faith wins.